Hello, I'm John Reisman, and this is Centrist News and Perspectives, where we focus on evidence, reason, and logic, as well as scope of an argument. What we hear in the media is often confused by a lack of relevant scope, and the scope gives us context. We need to know all the related and important pieces of any given puzzle. There's been a lot of talk in the media recently regarding the national debt or public debt, and the comparison between the Democrats and Trump's administration in how much or who's to blame for that debt. Now, if we take a look at the data, you can see President Obama did increase the debt load, and you can see it by about $500 billion on this chart. So we're really comparing data from the Department of Treasury on the pace. This is only the first 2 years of the Obama administration. It's in the light blue line. Now, in the red line, you can see Donald Trump's first 2 years of performance regarding loading the debt. And interestingly, his debt load is 300% worse than President Obama. And yet he's blaming President Obama. Well, that's because he always blames others. And mostly that's because he's usually using false or misleading claims. In fact, as of March 3rd, he has used 9,014 false and misleading statements to the public in his public statements. Now, that doesn't account for, of course, what he's doing privately. So let's take a deeper look at this debt and who's to blame. We can see, for example, between 1980 and around 1992, the Republican era where the debt load was increasing rather strongly. And then Bill Clinton took over and actually was able to turn that around and reduce that debt loading before he left office. Then President W. Bush took office, and you can see that he increased the debt again. But then you see a dramatic spike upwards during the Obama administration. And that's probably what Donald Trump is referring to, saying that's what President Obama did. But in fact, that is not what President Obama did, because that is a result of what happened during the George W. Bush administration, where no one, and mind you, this is not just on the Republicans, the Democrats are to blame here as well. In fact, you have to go all the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush, where he was actually working with Goldman Sachs, and the lobbyists were, of course, hammering on Congress and the Senate to make sure they could get rules for trading debt. Now, that created bubbles. Of course, we had a bubble burst in 2000, and we had a larger bubble burst in 2008. To recover from that, the Treasury Department had to print more money, and we had to do a lot of risky rules and policies to try and keep the economy going. And that was all occurring during the Obama administration. And you can see towards the end of Obama administration, it was starting to level out and, in fact, reverse a little bit. Now, since then, of course, Donald Trump is spiking the debt. So when we get the data for this next piece here, which, of course, is not finished until the end of Donald Trump's first term, we'll see a dramatic increase based on Donald Trump's impact from being in office. In other news, we see that Donald has now introduced the term bullshit into his public statements. Now, I'm sure some people will be offended by the fact that I just used that word, but the President of the United States is using that word publicly now, and I'm quoting him. So let's at least face this honestly. Donald always, I don't even say tends, he always blames others for what he's doing because he wants to make sure the light is shining on others. You see this in interviews, and this is a type of sophistry, and we're going to have a deeper discussion of sophistry so that everyone understands exactly how they're being fooled by political rhetoric, for example. But what Donald's doing here is casting blame on others to deflect it from himself. And you can see this almost every time he talks, or anyone in his administration. They're very well trained in the Trump method. You blame others and you point the finger in other directions. You never answer the questions directly unless it favors your position. So if there's a question that gives any kind of suspicion about anything about you or your administration, you deflect, you point fingers, and you make sure you talk about other people, not answering the question and not talking about what you yourself did in any particular case. This is very normal. We can see a lot of the press, for example, trying to get closer to the truth, and the Trump administration continually deflecting. And if you're a Trump follower, watch how they deflect. Whenever they're asked questions, they always evade and go in other directions. And this is, of course, mostly misleading and oftentimes lying, especially when Donald's talking. So pay attention, because it is important. We need to know what the truth is, because we all actually want to know the truth. Now, the problem with that is sometimes we think we know the truth based on a limited scope of information. So we need to go deeper on a regular basis, and it's not easy. And it's never going to be easy, because there's a lot of rhetoric out there, and there are a lot of people trying to trick us. Of course, we can always talk about Donald Trump clearing the swamp, when in fact he did not. He moved the entire swamp into the White House and the White House administration. And it's been ruling our country, spiking our debt, and endangering America's future based on what they're doing in office right now. So let's not pretend. Let's be direct, and let's focus on what is most likely the truth, not what we're being told by people who are trying to avoid investigations. A quick note on that. Donald Trump says he's the law and order president. If that were in fact true, he would not be evading investigations. He would be welcoming those investigations and saying, investigate me more. Investigate everything. Look at my tax returns. But Donald doesn't want us to see his tax returns, and Donald doesn't want us to see what Trump Organization is doing right now. As far as Russian collusion goes, and this is important, so pay attention, it doesn't matter if he's directly colluding with Russia. He's helping Russia. He is giving Vladimir Putin gifts every single day by keeping everything in America confused and avoiding dealing with actual national security issues. He doesn't even pay attention to security issue reports anymore, according to reports coming directly from the intelligence team. He demeans our intelligence community. He demeans our generals. He tells them they're not as intelligent as he is. It's clear he's not intelligent. That's obvious to just about everyone. Anyone that thinks he's intelligent is not paying attention close enough. Period. End of story. Sorry if that offends you. Deal with that. Okay, next. Mark Warner of Virginia has made remarks in response to an assertion that there's no factual evidence of collusion. Well, there's a lot of evidence for collusion, and it's pouring out of so many different testimonies. The thing about that is, we know that while Trump was running for office, he was actually trying to get hotels built in Moscow, which probably, and in fact most likely, if you think about it, is tied directly to the way he spoke about Vladimir Putin and Russia, and also the fact that he's ignoring the Magnitsky Act regarding Russian oligarchs, and also, let's not forget, regarding Saudi Arabia and the Khashoggi killing. There's been a lot of frustration regarding the intelligence capacity or for our government to deal with the Khashoggi killing, because Donald Trump is not delivering on his obligations to deliver evidence and statements regarding what's going on. In fact, the last meeting, the Trump administration did not allow any intelligence personnel to be involved because they actually have answers. And the Trump Organization doesn't want people to have the truth. They want them only to see what they want them to see, because they're making deals with other countries. Now, these deals are favoring Donald Trump and his family. That much is clear. We need to know the facts of the case. And again, Donald Trump says he's a law and order president. So Donald, open your books, because you're open and transparent. That's what you campaigned on. Let's see your tax records, and let's see what Trump Organization and everyone in your administration is doing regarding all these business deals surrounding the policies that you're choosing that are hurting America in the long run. Now, remember, this is important too. We got to talk about the economics. We see the stock market going up. That's not what's healthy for America. What's healthy for America is better jobs, better pay, better health care, better everything for the American people, not just for the rich people. And that's what Trump campaigned on, and that's why Trump lied to us, because he's only interested in making more money and protecting the friends that will protect him. The U.S. House panel launches a probe into possible obstruction by Trump. Well, we've seen obstruction by Trump since day one, basically, of the investigations. For example, when he got rid of Comey, when he got rid of the Attorney General Sessions, and he admitted it, because he did recuse himself. Trump didn't want him to recuse himself. He wants people that will do what he says. Now, some people will argue, well, a president needs someone that does that. Well, sure. Not if it's illegal, though. That's pretty important. And it's pretty clear that Donald has a lot of connections to what's going on in evidence. For example, Donald and his team said that there was no evidence. They didn't even get to drafting on the hotel for Moscow. There were actual plans. There was a location. There were beautiful drawings of the building. Of course, Trump is lying. That's actually obstruction. Now, it needs to be proven in court, and of course, we need to do more evidence collection, but Trump's doing his best to not be open and honest, to be completely opaque, not transparent. And that's why we need to get these investigations deeper into what's going on in the Trump administration, and that's what the Democrats are doing now. Of course, the GOP is complaining about that because a lot of them are most likely guilty of helping Donald Trump cover up these crimes. And it's important that we get closer to the truth. Now, next, what's interesting, there's a story on NBC, and this was about ordering the security clearance for Kushner and calling it an abuse of power. Well, there were a lot of conflicts when the intelligence committees reviewed Kushner, and there still are, because he's still doing business and working for Donald Trump in the White House. This is a conflict of interest for America, because the interest of foreign powers, whenever there's the ability for influence over America by foreign powers through an administration, that is precisely why we created the Electoral College, to make sure individuals like that never get into the office of the presidency of the United States of America. Another interesting story, we see people now comparing what Donald Trump is saying to Hitler. And the way it's being framed by the GOP, and I've got this one particular website here where it says CNN analyst Sam Vinograd compared Donald Trump's 2019 CPAC speech on Saturday to Adolf Hitler murdering 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Well, the way it's worded here, that's not correct. Because the truth of the matter is, nationalist and fascist type speech were used by Hitler in the 1930s as he continued to take over more and more power. And that's using populist argumentation, which Donald Trump basically does all the time. And when you make it nationalist, then it becomes dangerously fascist. Donald Trump, remember, he wants to make money. He doesn't really care about the American people. He only says he cares. That's called political rhetoric, and it's also called lying if it's intentional. Now, how do you prove that it's intentional? With Donald, it's pretty hard to prove anything, but it's fairly obvious that he lies consistently and is almost always misleading. That's what we have to pay attention to. We see Rosentstein in the news. There's a piece in Washington Post where he's talking about how the Mueller report should be public. Well, obviously. And remember, Donald Trump claims to be a law and order president, so the investigation should be public. If it's hidden, which seems to be what Donald Trump is trying to do with the new appointment of William Barr, who has not recused himself, because remember, Donald's commented about the fact that he wants attorney generals that will do what he says, not do what's right or ethical or legal necessarily, and that's clearly indicated in the inferences. Let's pause here for a second and let's talk about indications. Let's talk about intelligence, as a matter of fact. General Michael Hayden, who's a brilliant individual, at least in the sense that he understands security, national security issues, administration of those issues, and how it's been done. He's operated as director of both the NSA and the CIA. I remember in an interview once, he was asked about kind of what is intelligence, and he said very simply, well, it's basically if it looks like a duck, walks like, and talks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that's really the way intelligence works. And that's the way we need to operate within the relevant scope of the information, not just looking at our own narrow view, saying, all right, what are all the pieces of the puzzle, and what does that actually look like? And what it looks like is Donald is deceiving us on a regular basis for his own interests, to protect himself, not to protect America. If he was protecting America, he'd be caring about American concerns regarding, and forget the jobless rate. Remember, if the jobless rate drops for part-time jobs and low-wage jobs, that does not benefit America greatly. We have so much money flowing to the oligarchs, and that money comes from how many lobbyists have been able to influence the politicians to give money back to the oligarchs. That's not earning money, and that's not capitalism. Personally, I call that fraud. There are also stories coming out regarding whether or not the president can be indicted while sitting as president. And of course the GOP says no, he can't, and then we see others saying, not necessarily from the Democrats, but from legal advisors and prosecutors saying, yes, he can. Just because it's never been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. And we see Adam Schiff on Face the Nation saying the House Intel is focusing on the Moscow-Trump Tower deal and potential money laundering. Now, regarding money laundering, we've heard a lot of stories already about how Donald Trump's real estate deals, whenever he builds new developments, he's selling a lot of this to Russians. In fact, Russians live below him directly in Trump Tower. He usually would sell these apartments to them at exorbitant prices above market value. And of course, he'll say, well, I'm just a great businessman. But if these were in fact Russian mafia individuals, for example, then what he's doing is helping them launder that money in America. And of course, he's always going to try and keep his hands clean from that and not say anything that regards him knowing about that. But he's systematically sold to Russians over decades. And that's been indicated in multiple stories. So we need to keep a good eye on that. And yes, we still need to see all his tax returns. Going back as far as we can, we need to know what he's going on right now. We need to see the tax returns for what's happening at Trump Organization as well. In 2016, remember, I did a story about possible RICO violations. And I didn't go deep enough because there wasn't quite enough information yet, but the RICO case has only gotten stronger during the Trump administration. And there's a good chance that there will be multiple indictments eventually in his family as well as his organization and all his business contacts. Now, another story came out on The Guardian, and this one is interesting because it's discussing the neo-Nazi plot against America is much bigger than we realize. And there's always been, of course, extremism in right-wing politics, but it doesn't always come to the surface as much as it has. We've seen a dramatic increase in hate crimes ever since Donald Trump took office. We've also seen a dramatic increase in the number of countries able to elect dictators on populist agendas. That's something we need to pay attention to, because what happens in this kind of scenario typically is, go back to the 30s and Hitler and all of that, you end up having a dictatorship in your own country, and then actually nobody has fun with that. That's not as nice as it sounds. There might be a lot of people frustrated about immigrants and whatnot, and of course we should only have legal immigration. And remember this is really important too. You go back far enough, and the Trump organization, when his father, Donald was working with his father, the very first major lawsuit with the government was because of civil rights violations, and that created the laws for making sure that you couldn't be racist when you were renting properties to individuals in America. So that's a pretty clear indication too. And Trump, of course, dismissed all these arguments, and that's ridiculous. That's misleading again, or, of course, lying. Remember, the distinction between misleading and lying it's really clear, but Trump bends everything around his own interpretations. To think he doesn't know he's misleading people means that he's probably just an idiot. So either he's lying or he's an idiot. But let's not rule out the possibility he's lying and he's actually an idiot. I'm John Reisman, and this is Centrist News and Perspectives.